if you are as deep in the same very specific rabbit hole of YouTube Shorts that I am, you have more than likely seen this man. His name is Shawn Ryan, who is the host of the Shawn Ryan podcast. Before making his podcast, Shawn was in the Navy SEALs and also was a CIA contractor for 14 years before leaving and creating Vigilance Elite, which is, as described on the website's mission statement, a place if you want a straightforward, honest perspective of what the media isn't talking about or won't talk about, you've come to the right place. We're better than entertainment, we're the real thing. So this guy seems like he's on the level. Most of his episodes are interviews with people who are in some way loosely or directly connected with the military and those sort of agencies like the CIA. He also has on people who can highlight kind of the seedy parts of the world you don't get to hear about very often. Think the Joe Rogan podcast if the host wasn't a comedian and only brought on people to tell you about the horrors of the world. And look, that probably does seem a little harsh, and that's fair, it probably is. As you do before you go to bed, I was scrolling through my 60-second slot machine of choice, YouTube Shorts. And as I'm going, I happen to come across this short which I cannot find for the life of me anymore, but it introduces me to this man. His name is Eric Hecker, and he is the plumber who blew the whistle on the Death Star that Raytheon has created in Antarctica. No, that's not a joke. He goes into detail on this machine he calls a directed energy weapon for about 20 minutes of this 35-minute podcast. And look, I'll be honest, a lot of the technical stuff he says goes right over my head. I'm nowhere near knowledgeable enough on this topic, or even physics and engineering in general, to really get into the weeds of what he's saying and why it's wrong. All that I can really do is point at him every 2 seconds and say that he sounds like an idiot. So instead of doing just that, I reach out to a friend of mine who for the rest of the video we will refer to as the scientist. The scientist graduated university with a double degree in mechanical engineering and science, with a major in physics and a minor in astrophysics. And yes, I know, what I'm showing you does explicitly say that this is an unofficial academic record and that Monash University can't verify the authenticity of this document. But the reason I'm showing you this rather than something the university would say is official is because the scientist graduated last year and doesn't have his certificate yet. So this is all he has to prove his degrees. If you don't want to take this as any accreditation, that's fine, but just keep in mind that this unofficial confirmation of the scientist graduating and successfully completing the courses required to get the degrees listed on the document is more evidence for a claim than anything Hecker gives us during the entire 35-minute podcast. It is wild that in 5 minutes I have given more evidence for a claim than he does in that amount of time. That's crazy. So I got the scientist to listen to this podcast to see if anything this guy says makes any sense. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. Turns out you don't need a degree to tell this guy is full of shit. You just need half a brain, which it seems like a lot of the people in Shawn's YouTube comments don't particularly have, but to be fair, there were some that were just sitting in there being like, this guy sounds like he's full of shit. I think my favorite one, something like, it's not every day that a plumber explains quantum entanglement to you. What I got back from the scientist was 3 pages of notes before what it looks like either Eric stopped talking or the scientist just gave up writing. So today, let's have a watch along of this podcast and see the truth that the shadow government is not ready to tell us or its enemies.
You were experimented on as a child and trained to be a remote viewer.
Correct.
Through a program called Stargate Project.
Dude, just talk about that. Do you know how much more interesting and believable you are when you talk about an actual well-documented CIA mind control program compared to the next 30 minutes of baseless claims about a research base in Antarctica? For very quick context, Stargate, from what I've read, seems like it's just a precursor to MK Ultra. They experimented on people to see if they'd be able to get them to read minds or plant thoughts in other people's minds. Wasn't the Cold War such a fun time? Like, from everything that I've seen from this time, it's like if you were in the US and a scientist, you were either trying to just create better bombs to blow up Russia or make the X-Men. There is no in between on this.
I was a lead on the firefighting team, and because of that dual role capacity, I physically held a key that opened every single door in the facility. I had complete access to every compartment they manufactured.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, that sounds like a really good way that you would be able to get, like, to all the nooks and crannies of this facility. I'm sure he uses this key really well to investigate just what he's seeing and not instead just guess and Google things that he thinks he saw in a science base.
The ice cube neutrino detector is not simply a passive listening device as presented. for the science that they're claiming it to do. It also has the capacity to transmit. It's the world's largest directed energy weapons system.
So this is kind of his main point in this podcast, which is that the neutrino detector called IceCube, banger name by the way, sometimes I'll come up with a name like International Space Station, and then other times I'll come up with Mother of All Bombs. Like sometimes they let some good ones slip in. So anyway, his point is that this IceCube is actually a directed energy weapon or a big giant laser gun. Later in this, Hecker claims that neutrinos are a near weightless particle that can travel faster than the speed of light. However, our source, the scientist, clarifies that this is only speculation and that the actual speed of a neutrino has never been proven, which is exactly why the IceCube was built in the first place, so that we can gain a better understanding of what neutrinos are. I asked the scientist about what the IceCube is capable of, and his response was, all a neutrino detector does is detect. He also talks about another one of Eric's claims where he says that the detector is able to transmit. What does it transmit? He doesn't say. Why? More than likely because he doesn't know. And as we see later on with another supposed energy weapon, he's probably confusing a method of detecting with a laser that could blow up Alderaan.
It is responsible for the earthquakes in Christchurch, New Zealand in 2011 on the front end of the year.
To his credit, Shawn does ask how he knows this for a fact, and Eric's exact quote in response is,
because I was present, I was on the team, let's just say, and I've confirmed this.
Which is about as nothing of an answer as saying, the dog ate my homework, I saw it, it is in pieces. I understand that being in proximity to something, you get a pretty good idea of what is going on, but even in the way he says he is on the team isn't very convincing. He's not really saying it with a lot of conviction, and what I think is more important, doesn't clarify what his role on the team is, or explain why a firefighter/plumber is on the team of scientists running an experiment with this so-called weapon. Sure, it could catch fire. I don't have anything to back this up, but I am almost certain that any geologist would be able to debunk a laser causing an earthquake like it was seen in New Zealand. But unfortunately, I don't have a geologist. Instead, I have a scientist. And what he says is that I see no scientific way that neutrino detection can cause earthquakes. Maybe the neutrinos themselves when they pass through the Earth's crust cause some energy weirdness in it, but when I asked how likely it is that this is possible, he told me that neutrinos interact weakly with matter, so it's not very likely. He clarified that something like cosmic radiation can affect the Earth's magnetosphere and crust and maybe cause seismic events, but it is very unlikely. As far as the scientist, a guy who spends a lot of his free time reading about these very boring machines, is aware, the detector Hecker is talking about does not use frequency generation technology, which could be used to create earthquakes.
There's operators manuals right there in that information, and it states very clearly that each one of these DOMs can transmit at 2047 volts each.
I'll be honest, I'm confused on what the hell a DOM is, but apparently that makes sense because according to the scientist, what Hecker is saying doesn't really make sense either, and that's because in the scientist's words, he isn't clarifying what the machine is supposedly transmitting. He goes on to clarify that volts are units of electricity, not anything that can be transmitted. You can transmit energy through manipulating electromagnetic fields, but this is not something a detector would have the capacity to do. I get that Hecker's whole argument is that it's not just a detector, but even not being familiar with how these technologies work at all, I've never heard of any machine that has been created that can do both an inward and outward action in this way that he talks about. But what do I know? This guy read the instruction manual. You know who else read the instruction manual? The scientist. He went on and found the instrumentation and online systems document that Hecker keeps referring to. In it clarifies that 2047 volts is the max output voltage generator for the machines, which means that's how much power it produces, which is kind of like saying your car can transmit 12 volts because it has a 12 volt battery in it. But could you kill a person with your car? The idea of being able to use this machine as a weapon in the way that Hecker describes in the words of the scientist isn't possible. But what the hell does he know? He only has a Bachelor of Engineering and Science. Yuck! As Hecker puts it, the idea that these machines can be used in the way he describes are just a fact of life.
Can transmit at 2047 volts each. So these are currently the facts of life.
And gives no further evidence because why would he? It's a fact of life life, idiot. This is real. You understand now? Still talking about this machine transmitting, Hecker also adds that somebody else who is supposedly on the team told him that the machines caused the earthquakes in New Zealand, but that he wasn't there when it happened.
Well, I guess what I'm asking is, how did it even come to your attention that this triggered an earthquake if you're at the South Pole?
I could only say that it was communicated to me from team members that were present and fully read in at the time.
Which, unless I'm misremembering what he just said a couple of minutes ago...
How do you know for a fact that that was responsible for that?
Because I was present, I was on the team, let's just say.
...is completely different to the first version of the story that we heard. But no, it's good that his story's already changing. Either way, if we break down the chain of evidence on this story of the earthquakes being caused by this weapon in New Zealand, it starts at a guy who is described in some cryptic way to be on a team of scientists that have created a machine to observe space, which instead was actually used to cause a geological event that caused earthquakes in a region, which is prone to naturally occurring earthquakes in the first place, by the way. This is not a rare event for New Zealand to get an earthquake. This person then, assuming we're following the general way a story of any kind of government or private military cover-up goes, risked theirs and their family's lives to tell a plumber on the base about this cataclysmic event. Hecker's entire argument for this machine causing these earthquakes is based on you believing him. That's it. You have to solely go off of his words because there is no evidence he presents to back him up at all. And if you don't believe him, his only counter argument is that
these are currently the facts of life.
Can anyone else see the problem with this guy's story yet?
Additionally, in regards to the neutrinos, and that's what the DOMs, the digital optical modules, are detecting. That's their primary purpose as presented. Now, whether that neutrino comes from a quasar out in space or a exotic propelled engine off of vehicles that aren't being discussed contemporarily, it detects it, thus making it basically an air traffic control center for all non-discussed vehicles on this planet.
The scientist also goes on to say that DOMs being compared to air traffic control is a nice analogy, but not necessarily correct as a direct outer space traffic equivalent. But look, Eric, I'll cut you some slack here. He does this shit to me all the time. The term not necessarily correct has become a trigger word for me, like I'm in a toxic relationship. But I know he's only saying that because he wants what's best for me. He loves me deep down, you know. You might not see it, but he's different when we're alone.
Back to tracking neutrinos. What is that? Why are they tracking those?
Oh, for the purposes of science, they're claiming that there's a lot to be ascertained by understanding the difference between low power and high power neutrino ejections from cosmic occurrences. It's about that vague. This is what they spend our tax dollars on.
You're so right, man. That is too vague to be believable. Lucky for us, though, we have brave people like you who give us straight up answers like, these are facts of life. And some guy told me we misfired a weapon twice which caused earthquakes. And last but not least, this weapon can transmit. These are your fullest, most thought-out explanation throughout this whole podcast interview, but somehow a scientific body saying there is a lot to be understood about how neutrinos work in space and how cosmic ejections affect these particles is too vague for you. The guy who keeps justifying his points by basically saying, trust me, bro, has a problem with a fully thought-out statement. And then to top it all off, he does that fucking neckbeard Reddit nose blow laugh, which is just the icing on the cake. I'm really sorry to be the one to say this, and it could just be me, but Eric, you really come across as unlikable through this whole interview. The way you speak as if you are superior to anybody listening, how although you're making very outlandish claims with no real credibility to your name, you speak in a way that somebody who has a PhD in a very specific topic would, and just the bootlicking way you continue to call Shawn Sir every time he addresses you isn't helping your case. You do not look like you're showing him respect when you do this. You look like you're craving validation, which makes this so much harder to watch because it's just pathetic to see a man who looks between the ages of a father of a teenager or a grandfather to a primary school student act like this. We're not even halfway through this.
Quantum entangled communications at great distance. And the way quantum entanglement works is that you can take two particles, quantum entangle them, and then take those two particles and move them at any distance. And this is what they're utilizing. It's just the new level of science that affords us the ability to communicate at any distance instantaneously.
Again from Mr. Scientist, faster than light communication is at this point considered impossible and has never been proven to be possible. And just to paraphrase him, this is because, put simply, in classical physics, nothing can move faster than light. In quantum mechanics, you have quantum entanglement, where entangled particles can affect each other across infinite distances, but because nothing can move faster than light, including communications, you cannot receive information about that particle instantly, even though they are connected through quantum entanglement. From the way Hecker is describing it, it sounds like he's imagining particle A as the blue portal and particle B as the orange portal. And I think this because in his scenario, they're linked together in this way where you can immediately move things such as a cube or, in his argument, communication through radio waves between the two instantly. But entanglement is more like a CCTV system. The camera is linked to a computer, so you're aware of its position, but you can't talk through the camera, meaning that you can't send information through it immediately.
Gary McKinnon hacked NASA. He found the list of the off-world space fleet and the captains of the ships respectively.
According to the scientist, technology even in the current day would not be able to handle a space fleet. While it is true that there is a space force, it's nowhere near as capable as being soared from the MCU as he might think. The guy that Hecker is referring to as hacking into NASA is called Gary McKinnon, and in an interview with Wired, he does claim that when he hacked into NASA in between 2001 to 2002, that he found a file with non-terrestrial officers, which had the name and ranks of US air personnel that are not registered anywhere else. When asked if its use could be for a war game, which is when militaries get together and run different little drills against each other like a paintball team, McKinnon replied, "What I found could be a game, it's hard to know for certain." Either way that you look at that statement, you're putting words into the guy's mouth, but I don't think it's hard to see that even the guy who found the information isn't 100% sure of what its use is, or even what he found. Hecker also goes on to go directly against the scientist by saying that because two objects are quantumly entangled, they can respond to each other immediately and with no time, which is not correct at all, as we just explained. But like, that's fine. If I didn't have someone with a degree in physics explain how this works to me and all I had was Google, I would be making the same mistakes as Eric. Don't you see? We're the same. Except one of us is lying for attention and the other is doing this as a hobby for attention, with no current financial benefit from doing so. Fuck, maybe I should take a page out of Eric's book. Mr. Shawn Ryan, sir if you will, please have me on your show and maybe financially compensate me for my appearance. I don't really know how that works, to be honest, but if you could, that would be great. And listen, I can make it worth your while, because I have a story to tell you. Mr. Ryan, I saw a UFO and nobody believes me. I was 16 miles from home with nobody in sight. Give me $200.
And this is just where we are right now. It's just a new technology. It's a new conversation. People don't have to understand it yet. They just have to realize it's real.
Guys, I have a big announcement to make. Sydney Sweeney is my girlfriend. Now, I'm sure that there's a lot of questions, but I don't need to explain this situation so you can understand it. People just have to realize that this is real. Did this guy get confused and instead think that he's part of the plumbers from Ben 10 or something? I know it sounds like I'm shitting on plumbers, which ironically is something that is a genuine concern in their line of duty, but I promise you that I am not. I am well aware that tradies make the world go round. Without them, we would not have basic luxuries in our lives that we take for granted. In saying all of that, surely I am not the first person to point out that if you're a plumber coming forward with groundbreaking information that, if true, changes the way we view ourselves in the universe and also fundamentals of what we understand and know about physics, you might need a little bit more than just your word as proof of your claims.
What other kind of things can this?
Oh boy. voice-to-skull technology. Let's just say throw your voice into your head or my voice into my head. Well, the ability to add another one of your voices in there, but have it controlled by somebody else's microphone, so to say, is a very powerful tool.
He's just moving on to talk about mind control here, so let's be clear. This machine can shoot energy somehow, somewhere, in some direction, and can also cause earthquakes and other natural disasters, as well as transmit someone's words through a microphone into your brain, but have it sound like you. Even Reznov couldn't pull off that last one. But wait, Hecker, can you hear the numbers?
The numbers, Hecker. What do they mean? What happened in Antarctica? Was a bomber involved?
The McDonald's Corporation just had an ad come out a few months ago that they're looking into research and development in a technology that will afford them the ability to pump their commercials into your brain while you're sleeping.
Where can I read about this?
It's immediately available on the internet that McDonald's put this out there.
When asked this, Hecker jumps to the McDonald's example, which, yeah, that's what they were just talking about, but it feels more so like he goes to this example because this is the only thing that there seems to be like any evidence to be able to back him up on. But even then, everything that I've seen like links back to one article and TikTok videos. That's your guy. A degree and 5 years of experience learning about physics versus one article and TikTok videos. The more I see this guy, I think the less I hate him. He just kind of starts to embody what most people think of when they think of middle America, which is just a middle-aged guy who reads one article on some weird fuck-off website that no one's ever heard of and just takes that as fact for the rest of their life.
Is there anything else going on down there? I mean, we just went through a lot of stuff here.
Yes, actually.
Okay, I changed my mind. I'm so back. I hate this guy again. The little yes, actually, like he's being called to attention, gives that vibe that if he can just keep talking, he will. Like, it sounds like when somebody mentions your hyperfixation and now they're stun locked for the next 10 minutes while you're saying everything you know about it because you're realizing that this may be your only opportunity to have this conversation in your entire life. Huh. I think I get podcasting now.
There's a system known as ELF, extra low frequency. It's also a massive antenna that's embedded in the ice there. So the ELF is up and running, and that, again, is a multifaceted directed energy weapons platform.
Mr. Scientist clarifies that the ELF is just a low-frequency wave emitter for underwater communications. Nothing is heavily suspicious or weaponized about it, but that's what they want you to believe. When I asked if it could be weaponized, the scientist clarifies that the frequency waves the ELF generates are so large that they pass around objects instead of through them. Just to make a point on how useless this would be as a weapon, imagine if I had a gun and every time I shot it at you, the bullet moved away. It's not a very good gun, is it?
When people are talking about there being a hole at the South Pole, they're full of crap. They don't know what they're talking about. They're taking something that they know very little about and just running with it. They say in other ways that, a little information is a dangerous thing, and that's what these people are doing, is they're operating off of very little information.
Why does that make you so angry? Do you think that maybe this looks like he could be projecting here? Why would he do that? Who knows? Maybe due to some kind of insecurity that he would be perceived in this way, so he's trying to differentiate himself from them to keep any kind of small amount of credibility he has, if any.
The Atmospheric Research Observatory, as I testified in DC, I witnessed myself that building would, with great regularity, have a very powerful green laser beam shooting out of it into the cosmos. It was probably a secondary means of long-range communication and or another weapons platform.
I think that this is my favorite rebuttal from the scientist. Green laser is for detecting atmospheric molecules. That's it. That's all he wrote. All I can assume is that Hecker saw a green laser and went, hold on, I've seen this before.
Man, back to the putting voices in people's heads. Are you aware of any ways to defend against that?
Know thyself.
Dude, I couldn't help but laugh at that. Like, just the snap reaction. It seems like it's so rehearsed. Like, it's so funny to me. It's got like the same vibe as this one Super Mega joke from ages ago.
So offended that I said something about the Iron Giant. Christ didn't walk the earth.
Eric, is there anything that I'm missing that you want to bring to the public?
That's a great question.
Jesus, it's so just egocentric to be like, you asked me something that can allow me to speak for another 30 minutes. What a great question. After this point, he kind of just stops making claims and just starts talking about the operation of the base and going over things that he had already gone over before. It also ends really abruptly. Like, Shawn has zero to add to this and just wanted to let him go, which is really weird for a guy whose job it is to talk.
Man, I really appreciate it. That's a lot of info to process.
I understand.
It's going to take me a minute to come up with questions, and would you be willing to come back?
I would love to come back.
Let me digest this, and then we'll come up with a date and do a longer form interview.
At least in something like the Joe Rogan podcast, which, to be clear, I only ever watch if he has someone on that I'm interested in listening to, because credit where credit's due, Joe is a really good interviewer. I think the distinction between him and Shawn is that they both let their guests talk about what they want to, but Joe will occasionally stop the guest to clarify something that wasn't explained properly or to break down a complex issue, and will also stop the guest to just discuss something that he has a different perspective on, like that time that he had a doctor on to discuss vaccines. A really good example of him doing this, though, is the Alex Jones episode, because almost every couple of sentences, Joe interjects, asking him to either clarify something, provide a source, or just to have Jamie pull that up. And look, I do see the irony in what I'm doing here. I myself am making bold claims against Hecker's arguments while giving very little evidence, if any, to dispute the claims from one single source. I can see the argument that what I'm doing is the same as Hecker. The difference is, I showed you my source. I didn't show you the individual because, well, quite frankly, no one knows for sure what the scientist looks like. But what I did show of him was the sum of his parts. I showed you the 5 years of his life that he dedicated to become an expert in this field. Based on the Australian government's own website, out of a ranking of 10, his qualifications list him as an 8. Eric Hecker is a plumber. On average, a plumber in Australia has a qualification listed as a 4, and that's in a completely separate field. The way that Hecker learnt about the systems that he saw in Antarctica is the same way that a COVID conspiracy theorist opened their third eye. Actually, no. At least the COVID conspiracies were supposedly coming from doctors, nurses, and scientists. His explanations are coming from himself, which, as the scientist puts it, sounds like he is reading a manual and misunderstanding it. Throughout this whole interview, he sits there with next to no interjections or basic questions from the host, saying that he knows what he saw in a desperate attempt to not have to even try to give any kind of evidence to back up what he is saying. And look, I understand the importance of first-hand accounts. I am a big JFK conspiracy believer, as well as believing that those 3 ex-military men who went before Congress to testify about aliens were telling the truth. Do you know why I believe them over Hecker? Documents and shared experiences. Of the 70 people who testified in court that they thought they knew where shots were fired from when Kennedy was killed, 21 of them thought it came from the grassy knoll. That is 21 corroborating witnesses agreeing on the same thing. And look, let's make it even fairer. Of the 178 witnesses who testified in court that they were there on the day of the shooting, 11.8% thought they heard shots coming from the grassy knoll. On average, 350 scientists are on the ice cube at any given time. If we're generous and include Hecker as a scientist, as to not have to count all of the other staff that would be there, like your mechanics, your plumbers, your kitchen staff, anything like that, that means that of all the people that were there at the same time as Hecker, 0.29% of them have the same story to tell as Hecker. A second shooter in Daly Plaza is 40 times more likely to have happened than this story that Hecker is telling based on that one statistic alone. The fact that this guy was able to get on a podcast that had around 2 million subscribers at the time of this episode and just says whatever he wanted without challenge and without any kind of proof is beyond insane to me. How? Given everything that happened between the years of 2020 to 22, even before that with the misinformation campaigns in 2015 to 16 with the US elections, something that forced some of the biggest, most powerful companies in the world to add fact-checking to their websites, by the way, how are we still able to look at this man as he tells his story story supported by nothing at all, and for him to be taken even remotely seriously. And do you know what's even worse than that? This is only going to become a bigger problem as a platform like Facebook is able to turn off this service as it pleases. Do you know why it has been flicking this fact-checking tool on and off in Australia like it's some kind of strobe light at an EDM festival? Because of one media company, News Corp. Sky News Australia complained about Facebook's fact-checking tool being used to debunk arguments on their chosen side in a nationwide political vote. Sky News Australia is owned by News Corp, which was founded by Rupert Murdoch. And if you don't know who that is, he's the guy who invented Fox News. Him and his son Lachlan are the men who control information in this current day, willing to pay settlements at their highest of $787 million US, 1.2 billion Australian dollars for lying about the voting machines not working correctly in the 2020 election, and most recently, $12 million US for getting a staff member to lie in court. These are the types of people who have enough money to get away with anything. Even fact-checking does not stop them from blatantly lying, because they can always pay their way out of it. When you have a media empire like this go unchecked, it makes sense that it would trickle down into podcasts like the one we just saw. When people can just say whatever they want without the need or expectation that they should prove what they're saying, and that becomes what we accept as normal, no shit, people are gonna start believing more and more crazy theories. You're telling me someone in the 60s would believe celebrities are killing kids to drink their blood? Like, what the fuck are we doing here? If there is anyone that after this podcast believed Hecker's story without having seen anything to back a single claim that he made, who then goes out into the world now thinking that the US is able to tear the world in half with a single machine whenever they like, that is the problem with giving people like him a platform. And you know what's even worse? Search his name on Facebook and look at the posts. There are genuinely people out there now who believe him. This is how misinformation is spread. Not through AI articles or some kids on Twitter hitting the community note button, but by having a public figure with a dedicated fan base put their name and brand behind some guy who just wants some attention. This podcast is sickening, and every person involved in the creation and production of this who at no point thought to themselves to maybe even do the most basic Google search to fact check a single claim Hecker makes during the whole half hour should be deeply ashamed of themselves. Anyway, I hope you liked the video. It kind of took a turn there towards the end. I thought this was just going to be funny, haha. Look at this stupid idiot on a podcast just saying dumb shit that doesn't make sense. But after writing this for a while, I realized the actual reason that this upsets me. And I think what it really comes down to is just that, yeah, it is so easy to be able to prove something wrong, and yet nobody does it. It feels like the longer we go on this route, less and less people think that anything they hear should be fact-checked. It's not that hard to Google something, and I think if there's anything that you can take away from this video, even if you never watch one of my videos again, even if you hated this, you don't like me because I have a funny voice, if there's, I guess, a message that you can take away from this video, is that just be mindful of the sources and the information that you are absorbing, because if you just took this guy based off of his, like, just his word, just from this entire podcast, you are just immediately assuming that this thing is real and that we're living in a much scarier time, which I feel like, yeah, I obviously not definitively, but through this, I have just poked a few holes in what he was saying, right? And it's really important that you're aware of what you're consuming, because if you're not, then you can just end up, like, they call it like the alt-right pipeline, right? That's probably the most like known kind of version of it, because the other side of saying it is just saying woke mind virus, which is just too funny to take seriously. The idea of this alt-right pipeline of, like, you just go from one point down, and it's at each level it becomes slightly more believable at each thing you go. Like, I saw something on Twitter the other day that was something like J.K. Rowling being like, sex is sex, and then ending up at the bottom here now where it's like Holocaust denial. Like, that's a pipeline, you know? You can kind of see that. And if you're not conscious of the information that you're receiving and challenging that information, it is so easy for anyone to end up like that. I guess the less yappy version of that is just whenever you're just consuming something, just think, does this sound correct to me? And if you think no, or you aren't sure if it does or not, just Google it and just see if you can find anything. Be aware of who you're reading. I guess media literacy is what I'm trying to hit at there. This is something that I could feel like I could talk about for a long time, but let's keep this short and sweet. Thank you for watching. If you did enjoy it, you can leave a like. I got angry here, so if you want angry stuff, I can start adding in more topics that I might get angry about, and you can vote on those in the community polls that I do for the topics of the videos. And if you want to see more, you can subscribe. I'm not always angry, like a couple of weeks ago, how I just got drunk and cooked some food, and the week before played South Park. So that's it. Thank you for watching. I'll see you later. Have a good one.